The path to infidelity is rarely a deliberate choice, but rather a slow, almost imperceptible descent into emotional vulnerability. Many married women do not actively seek out affairs. Instead, they find themselves drawn into them through a series of small moments, innocent conversations, lingering glances, or a subtle thrill from unexpected attention. Over time, routine and predictability can make a woman feel unseen, unheard, and emotionally disconnected from her husband. This absence of emotional fulfillment creates an internal void, making her more susceptible to external validation. Psychologists call this the slow erosion of boundaries, a process in which a person gradually becomes comfortable with behaviors they once considered unacceptable. It starts with minor justifications. It's just a conversation. He's just a friend. Or, it's harmless flirting. But as emotional intimacy builds outside the marriage, a dangerous line is crossed. The woman may not even realize when her heart has shifted, but by the time she does, it often feels too late to turn back. The real danger lies in the illusion of control, the belief that one can stop at any time. However, emotional connections function similarly to addictions, activating the same dopamine-driven pathways in the brain. The rush of feeling desired again becomes intoxicating, making it harder to walk away. What started as a harmless interaction can soon redefine her entire reality. Understanding this psychological progression is crucial, not to assign blame, but to recognize the warning signs before they lead to irreversible consequences. Emotional neglect, routine indifference, and lack of connection are often the true culprits behind infidelity. To prevent this cycle, both partners must continually nurture their bond, ensuring that neither feels invisible in the marriage. One of the most overlooked reasons why some married women seek attention outside their marriage is the unspoken void, the gradual loss of emotional intimacy. In the early stages of a relationship, passion is intense, conversations are deep, and both partners feel seen and desired. However, as routine and responsibilities take over, the excitement fades, and many women begin to feel invisible in their own homes. They are no longer just individuals with dreams and desires. They become wives, mothers, and caretakers, often losing sight of their personal identity. This slow transformation creates an emotional hunger, not necessarily for another man, but for the feeling of being desired, valued, and emotionally connected. Women are wired for deep emotional bonds, and when their primary relationship stops fulfilling that need, their subconscious begins seeking validation elsewhere. This validation can come in the form of simple compliments from a coworker, a man who genuinely listens, or an interaction that momentarily makes her feel interesting and attractive again. These seemingly harmless moments can become a lifeline, like oxygen after years of suffocation in a monotonous relationship. Psychologists explain this phenomenon through the Coolidge effect, the idea that novelty triggers desire. When every day looks the same, and conversations become purely logistical, centered around chores, bills, and responsibilities, excitement fades. A woman might not intend to cross boundaries, but the temptation to feel wanted again can lead her closer to the edge. This is not about morality, but human nature. The real issue isn't infidelity itself, but the lack of emotional renewal within marriage. The best way to prevent this cycle is to continuously invest in the relationship, making an effort to nurture emotional closeness, keep communication open, and remind each other why the connection was special in the first place. The justification game. How the mind rationalizes betrayal. No one wakes up and decides to betray their marriage. Infidelity doesn't happen in a single moment. It's a slow, slippery process that begins long before any lines are crossed. The mind is a master of self-deception, and when emotions conflict with moral values, it finds ways to justify actions that once seemed unthinkable. This psychological phenomenon, known as cognitive dissonance, allows people to alter their perception of reality to relieve guilt and continue behavior that goes against their core beliefs. For many married women who engage in emotional or physical affairs, the first step isn't a blatant act of betrayal. It's the tiny justifications that make each next step feel less significant. It starts as innocent interactions, a casual conversation, a friendly text, or a lingering glance. She tells herself, "It's just talking. There's no harm in that." But as the emotional connection deepens, the lines begin to blur. The mind starts shifting the narrative. If my husband paid more attention to me, I wouldn't need this. Blame is redirected, and rationalizations grow stronger, leading her further down the path. The most dangerous justification is the "I deserve this" mindset. Once a woman convinces herself that she's been neglected, unappreciated, or unfulfilled for too long, the betrayal no longer feels like a betrayal. It feels like justice. She believes she's simply reclaiming something she has been denied, and at this stage there's almost no turning back. This gradual process makes it clear that infidelity isn't just about physical betrayal. It's an emotional shift that happens long before any action is taken. The most effective way to prevent this isn't through control or suspicion, but by nurturing emotional intimacy and ensuring both partners feel valued and fulfilled in their marriage. The breaking point: when small choices lead to irreversible actions. Infidelity doesn't happen suddenly. It unfolds through a series of small, seemingly insignificant choices that accumulate over time. Many married women don't set out to betray their vows, but they unknowingly walk a dangerous path, unaware that each small step brings them closer to the breaking point. Psychologists call this the threshold theory, which explains why people engage in behaviors they once thought were impossible. The hardest part isn't the act of betrayal, it's crossing that first invisible boundary. The first secret message, the first friendly meetup, or the first lingering touch. Each one feels minor in the moment, but it lowers resistance to the next step. And once that line is crossed, the next one feels even easier. The mind is adaptable, and guilt, while powerful at first, gradually fades. A woman who once felt uneasy about deleting a message now justifies it as protecting her privacy. The first lie feels wrong, but after telling herself it's harmless, dishonesty becomes second nature. Before she realizes it, she's not just keeping secrets, she's living a double life. What makes this process so dangerous is that most people don't recognize when they've gone too far until it's too late. The moment she starts emotionally investing in another man, she has already distanced herself from her husband. By the time the affair becomes physical, she has rewritten the narrative in her mind. Her marriage is already over in her heart. The real lesson here? Self-awareness is crucial. If someone finds themselves justifying behaviors they once considered unacceptable, it's a sign they're dangerously close to crossing a threshold that cannot be undone. The justification game. How the mind excuses betrayal. Infidelity doesn't begin with a deliberate decision. It starts with small justifications that gradually erode personal boundaries. Most married women who engage in emotional or physical affairs don't wake up one day and decide to betray their marriage. Instead, the process unfolds in subtle ways, with the mind finding ways to justify each step. Psychologists call this cognitive dissonance, the tension that arises when a person's actions contradict their values. To relieve this discomfort, the brain finds ways to rationalize behavior that would otherwise cause guilt. A woman might start by telling herself, "It's just a conversation. There's nothing wrong with talking." As the connection deepens, she downplays it. "We're just friends." Over time, these justifications evolve. "If my husband paid more attention to me, I wouldn't need this." Each thought eases the guilt and makes the next step feel more acceptable. One of the most dangerous forms of self-deception is compartmentalization. A woman engaging in an emotional affair tells herself it's separate from her marriage. that it has nothing to do with her commitment to her husband. But in reality, emotional intimacy is often the first betrayal. Once a woman starts sharing personal struggles, desires, and deep emotions with another man instead of her husband, she has already distanced herself from the marriage. The final and most destructive rationalization is the "I deserve this" mindset. A woman who feels unappreciated, neglected, or emotionally starved may begin to see the affair as justified retribution. "I've sacrificed so much for this marriage. I deserve to feel wanted again." This is the point of no return. The real danger? These justifications blind a person to reality until they've crossed a line they never thought they would. Recognizing these mental traps is the only way to prevent self-deception before it turns into irreversible damage. The breaking point. When innocent actions become irreversible. No one believes they will cross the line until they do. Infidelity doesn't happen overnight. It's a gradual descent that starts with small, seemingly innocent actions. A woman doesn't wake up one morning and decide to betray her marriage. Instead, the process begins with tiny, almost imperceptible shifts in behavior. A friendly text, a lingering glance, a harmless secret. Over time, these small moments accumulate, pushing her closer to the breaking point. Psychologists refer to this as threshold theory, which explains why people who once swore they would never do something eventually find themselves doing exactly that. The hardest part isn't the final act. It's crossing the line the first time. The first text message that feels a little too personal. The first time she meets up with him just as friends. The first time his touch lingers slightly longer than it should, and she doesn't pull away. Once that first step is taken, the second becomes easier. What once felt forbidden starts to feel normal. Neuroscientists have found that romantic and sexual attraction activate the same brain pathways as addiction. The dopamine rush of a new connection becomes intoxicating. Even if she tells herself, "This is the last time," she finds reasons to go back, not because of the other man, but because of how she feels when she's with him. The guilt that once felt unbearable starts to fade. At first, lying feels unnatural. The first hidden message, the first excuse, the first racing heartbeat when her husband asks, "Who are you texting?" But over time, the human mind adapts. She gets better at covering her tracks, at justifying her actions, at believing her own lies. By the time she realizes she's trapped in a double life, it's too late. The marriage she once cherished has already unraveled, and what started as small, harmless moments has become irreversible. The psychological addiction of an affair. Why walking away feels impossible. Infidelity isn't always about falling out of love. It's about falling into an emotional addiction. When a married woman crosses the line, it's rarely a calculated decision. Instead, it's a slow emotional shift that rewires her mind before she even realizes it. What starts as an innocent connection turns into an irresistible escape, and once she steps into this new reality, walking away feels impossible. Psychologists compare emotional affairs to drug addiction. When a woman engages in a new romantic connection, her brain releases dopamine, the same chemical responsible for the highs of gambling or substance abuse. Each interaction, whether it's a message, a glance, or a conversation, gives her an emotional hit. The excitement, the secrecy, and the novelty become intoxicating. Even when she tells herself, "I should stop," she finds herself drawn back, craving that next rush. Over time, this addiction to the feeling starts replacing her emotional connection to her husband. The guilt that once weighed heavily on her evolves into justification. She tells herself, "I deserve this. He stopped paying attention to me. If my marriage was fulfilling, I wouldn't feel this way." These rationalizations protect her from confronting the reality that she has already emotionally checked out of her marriage. At this stage, her primary emotional connection is no longer with her husband. Even if she hasn't physically crossed the line, in her mind and heart, she already has. Her marriage becomes secondary, and her husband, once the most important person in her life, feels like the other man. By the time she realizes the depth of her emotional detachment, she's at a point of no return, where the affair isn't just an option anymore, but a necessity. And once that belief settles in, everything changes. The danger of emotional rationalization. How justifications lead to betrayal. No one wakes up one day and decides to betray everything they've built. Infidelity isn't a sudden action. It's a slow, subconscious process of rationalization. A woman doesn't set out to cheat, but small, seemingly harmless justifications pave the way for crossing the line. At first, it's completely innocent. A friendly conversation, a moment of laughter, a simple text exchange. She reassures herself, "It's nothing. I'm just talking." But as time passes, the connection deepens. The conversations become more personal, the emotional bond grows stronger, and the secrecy starts to form. Yet her mind protects her from guilt by downplaying the reality. Psychologists refer to this as cognitive dissonance. When a person's actions don't align with their values, the brain creates excuses to bridge the gap. Instead of acknowledging that she's developing an emotional attachment to another man, she convinces herself, "I'm not doing anything wrong. It's just flirting. If my husband gave me more attention, I wouldn't need this. It's not like I'm actually cheating." But here's the danger. The more she justifies, the easier it becomes to push boundaries. What started as emotional connection turns into late-night messages. Secrets replace honesty. And before she knows it, she's emotionally detached from her marriage, long before any physical betrayal even happens. By the time she crosses the final line, she's convinced herself that it's not even betrayal, it's justice. She tells herself, "I deserve this. I've sacrificed too much," or "He ignored me for years." Once that belief solidifies, guilt disappears. The truth? People don't cheat because they stop loving their partner. They cheat because they've convinced themselves that what they're doing is justified. And once that mental shift happens, there's no turning back. The power of self-awareness and boundaries in relationships. One of the most important lessons from this analysis is that betrayal doesn't happen overnight. It happens through small, seemingly insignificant choices. Whether in relationships, careers, or personal development, our actions are shaped by gradual shifts in mindset. This is why self-awareness is crucial. People often justify actions that go against their values by rationalizing their behavior. They tell themselves, "It's just harmless," or "I deserve this." But each small justification weakens their integrity, leading them down a path they never intended to take. The key to avoiding this slow erosion of values is to set strong boundaries and be honest with yourself. In relationships, this means recognizing emotional detachment before it turns into temptation. If you feel unseen, unheard, or unfulfilled, communicate rather than seek validation elsewhere. In life, it means staying disciplined and not allowing minor compromises to turn into major regrets. The truth is, every major mistake starts with a small step in the wrong direction. The strongest people are those who recognize these warning signs early and correct their course before it's too late. Control your mind, set clear boundaries, and never let temporary emotions dictate permanent decisions.